Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galman and this is the show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is Finbarr Doyle, MD of P4HB, Procurement for House Builders. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you with us. And joining Finbarr is David Galman, development expert and former director of Galliard Homes, who I think are now London's probably biggest private developer, aren't they?
I think they probably still are, yes indeed.
Yeah. Even though you've left.
Well,
Well,
all good things come to an end.
I suppose they do. Good. Well, we'll get right on with the questioning. And Finbarr, you're going first. Do the panel think that the government, through our national house builders, will be able to meet the 1.5 million housing target set by the PM?
In short, no.
I thought you might say that.
I think, you know, they've made a bold announcement, which, you know, fair ball to them for doing that. And then they've gone into consultation about the planning the planning rules or the planning changes that they want to implement. I think they've done things the reverse of how they maybe should have. Yeah. I think they should have gone into consultation first. Spoken with the key sort of players in the market, and started asking questions like, how can we? What if? What would need to happen? What sort of things are going to drive and be drivers in legislation and policy, in intervention, in modular, in, you know, creating the right planning environment, unlocking the deadlocks that have been there for years, really. And actually, I think what's been announced is probably going to exacerbate what we've got in essence, rather than solve. Okay. Sorry to be negative, but I think that's where we are.
Well, I think you're probably right. Now, I should explain to our viewers that David and I have been down here for about 25 or 30 years, or heaven knows how long, and we've had two serious problems in common for all that time, I think, and one is planning consent and the other is valuations. But I think let's stick to the planning for the moment.
It's just always planning. Finbarr's right. It's you know, it's a bold statement, it's a bold announcement, and that obviously helped them become elected along the way with everything else that they've had fully costed. I mean, everything's fully costed, but nothing appears to be fully costed. Planning is the biggest issue, because whatever the government says, you are still at the behest of the local authorities, not even including NIMBYism in that, just the local authorities themselves we know are difficult.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if our regular viewers have seen one or two of our clips, they'll have seen me say quite often, when somebody says, how's the market? I say, well, what do you mean by the market? Break it down. Which bit of the market do you mean? And I think it's the same with planning. It's all right saying 1.5 million new homes. What sort of new homes? Yeah. Do we really understand what affordable housing is? Do we really understand what social housing is? Do we know how to separate it properly? Yeah, you know, it's very difficult to pin these numbers on what's really needed. Do you agree, David?
Putting the burden on private developers for the past 2 decades in respect of social housing has been completely unfair, and it's been incredibly difficult to then ascertain what actually is, as you say, what actually is affordable housing, what actually is social housing. It should be looked after by, maybe paid for by private development in some way, to an extent, but it should be looked after by a completely separate body.
I think, there is no such thing as affordable housing in this country, really, is there? I mean, let's face it, because even at an entry level, no one can get on the ladder now. That's now, you know, the Bank of Mum and Dad is the 4th biggest lender in the UK, and even still, you look at just trying to get basic living standards into new build homes, and it's just not possible at a price that people can access. So I think David's right. I think, you know, there has to be some sort of intervention and some sort of surety by the government on creating that sort of affordable housing at affordable level.
Yes, I don't mean this in any kind of flip way, but do either of you think that the government have really got a grasp of what's needed?
No. I really don't. You know, it's interesting. We've had previous conversations where you've said, you know, what you admire about what they've done in their first sort of period is they seem to have accessed, in certain aspects of their policy agendas, they've accessed experts and brought experts into advise. The one area that they announced on day one, I don't think they've really sought the opinion of the sector. in terms of what really they should be thinking, what the policies really should have been shaped around. I think they just went with what, as David said, with what was promised in the election.
I think you're probably right. And I mean, on the rental market, which, let's forget, starts off with a property sale because the landlord has to buy. The Evening Standard was saying the other night that they're expecting a huge exodus of landlords, and especially the smaller landlord, through a series of taxation changes, regulation changes, insulation requirement changes. It's not looking like a happy story, is it?
I don't believe everything I read, and I think the headlines are sometimes there to sensationalise, what isn't really that big a noise. But I think there is a sentiment. We speak to a lot of players in the HMO market, and they're concerned. They really are concerned. Yeah.
Okay. All right. David, your question. Is the north-south divide in terms of house prices still as wide as ever? Or has a limited amount of levelling up provided by the last government helped at all?
Without wishing to sound negative, as Finbarr was just now,
that's another no.
It's another no, but it's a no based on. I mean, levelling up was a great headline, and I think that's probably all it was. I don't see that anything happened. I mean, they even cut HS2 short, which would have been a huge part of levelling up. And whether you believe it should have been done or not, in terms of house prices, I think what tends to happen when there's been a stagnation or even a downward spiral in terms of prices and valuations, the one area that actually always bounces back quicker, faster and stronger than anywhere else is London and the South East. So therefore, the gap is actually going to widen, I believe.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, I was abroad one time and I looked at this particular site, and it was a hotel that had gone derelict and one thing or another. It was next to this beautiful sort of waterway. And I said to the person, why don't somebody develop this and make a beautiful harbour and a beautiful... And they said, sorry, who do you think has the money here for a boat? Who do you think has the money to be able to stay in a hotel? Why do you think it's empty? And to a degree, to a lesser extent, that's the north-south divide, isn't it?
It's affordability.
It's affordability. And if you haven't got a sort of eco-climate where people can afford what they want to buy, then that's the problem that you're hitting. And whether you've got a fast train going there or not isn't going to make a lot of difference, is it?
No, people's disposable income is that much lower, and it's just much more difficult. Everyone thought that perhaps it's going to be less expensive to build in the regions. Well, that's a fallacy. You would because the materials cost the same.
It's the same,
and the labour's not too much different, so it's exactly the same. And your end price is that much lower. I mean, there has been some great regeneration in Bristol, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, even. But that hasn't helped the suburbs of those areas. It hasn't helped the ordinary market. It's perhaps done a mini type of Canary Wharf in those areas with lots of new high-rise, but they've all been bought by investors who've let them out, and usual.
Yes. And that in itself can cause housing inflation, can't it? Where you get new developments coming in asking new sort of groundbreaking prices. It can really distort the market in these sort of peripheral areas, can't it?
Well, it can do, because once you start creating a record price for an area, then perhaps alarm bells should start ringing.
Yeah.
We're good at that.
Really good at that. We're really good at that.
What, creating it or the alarm bells?
Both.
Yeah. Quite interesting. So, do we see any prospect of the north catching up with the south at all, or will it just remain constant, the difference?
I guess it will remain fairly constant. I can't see any changes in my lifetime now. I don't think so, but let's hope that there is some. Let's hope that there is some help, and it can improve.
Right. I mean, as a developer, for instance, with HS2, did you look at HS2 and look at the various stops and say, you know what, I'm going to follow that course because they're going to be growth areas? Or...
Yes, of course we did. Back in those times, and it much the same as you did down here at Canary Wharf. All the railways coming in. Let's see what we can do. Elizabeth Line, the same thing. HS2, very similar. But I don't think at the end of the day, it's a case of, I don't think that many people are going to live in Birmingham and commute daily to London. They're just not going to do it. They're living there because they're working there.
And area development takes such a long time, even in boom times, doesn't it? I mean, my first property work in London was down at Butler's Wharf, but it took 20 years for that to really work.
It's a whole generation. It's a whole generation, really. If you think about, what's happened here in Canary Wharf.
There's certain areas on the way to Butler's Wharf in that end of London where people were telling me that it's a super growth area, but I'm still not sure I'd want to get out my car after dark down there, Takes a long time, doesn't it?
It takes ages. I mean, you and I have seen, how many times have we seen the road dug up and replaced around here in and around Canary Wharf and E14? It's been constant, and we've seen the original 2-storey warehouses that were built here, the little sheds which have now given way to towers and so on. So it just takes a long time.
Okay, well, on that note, we'll go to our break. So join me again after the break when I'll be asking David and Finbarr more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galman and I'm joined by Finbarr Doyle and David Galman. Welcome back, guys. Finbarr, do the experts think that developers in general are happy with the government's policy of introducing grey belt areas, lessening of geographical build restrictions, and further, will it speed up and increase the housing stock?
The initial feedback...
Is this going to be another no?
No, it's not going to be another no. It's another but.
Okay.
The initial response from what we gathered from speaking to our clients, and also the reactions from some of the larger contractors and developers, was positive. I think that they liked the idea that a grey belt could be clearly defined and understood in terms of how they digest that information. I still don't think anyone knows what it will be, because you've got a few moving parts to that. First of all, proximity to being able to develop it in a way that people want to live there. 75% of the time when people are buying a property, it's about location, not about what the property is. So location's an issue. Infrastructure is obviously a key issue. And then you've still got this imbalance between, or this disconnect between central government and local government. Will local planning view the framework in the same way as it was intended consistently across the patch, and can developers view that and back that and invest in that and plan for that? And that's where I think the buts are. That there's some high level sort of, oh yeah, that could work. But generally speaking, the feedback is we don't know yet, and we're not even sure where these grey belts might actually end up being landed. Well, one thing that I did find out though is that even if the interpretation of what grey belt is, it constitutes to about 300,000 homes, which, well, that's only a scratch on the 1.5 million they want to build. So is this another sort of flag?
Well, I think you mentioned 2 important things there. One is the infrastructure. And I mean, we went through a period, didn't we, of redeveloping office buildings and factory buildings into residential. And it often didn't work very well because there was no infrastructure. There were no shops, there were no play areas, no sort of family activity areas. Very, very, very difficult. And to create useful infrastructure around a development takes many, many years.
And a lot of planning. We're not good at that.
And again, you're right. I don't know whether local authorities are going to take kindly to people in Westminster deciding what may or may not be acceptable development areas in their own counties. What do you think, David?
Yeah, there'll be lots of challenges to it, won't there? You can see it coming, even though the majority of the local authorities within inside London, it may be all, I don't know because I don't check it, they're all left-leaning, and therefore you would think they would support the government, but they won't, and we know they won't because there's just tons of NIMBYism, and they don't want this and they don't want that, and that's the problem.
I think there might be a plus result out of this. I'm still not convinced that in these days of very complex development needs in terms of technology, eco considerations and all the rest of it. I'm never sure whether a sort of 10 or 12 man lay committee at a council is the right body to be deciding on these things.
It's definitely not. And they've announced 300 extra planning officers. Well, that's one per planning office. It's not going to be.
But you see, you'll often find, well, even if the planning officer recommends something, doesn't mean the lay committee is going to pass it.
No, they don't have to.
Shouldn't these planning officers be privatised in some way?
Yeah.
Some way they should be more incentivised to actually give planning permissions, albeit a correct planning permission.
The irony is that the really good planning officers leave and become private planning advisors to the planning officers. So if they just outsourced
In the first place, yeah.
Cut the middleman out.
Cut the middleman out. Seriously.
Well, I think you're right. I also, to some extent, probably at the lower end of the scale, blame developers and people who want to build. Sometimes they cause problems themselves. They tend to view the council as the enemy and expect to go into conflict, whereas actually the councils do go out of the way to provide sort of duty planning officers that you can go and discuss matters with, who really will be helpful and give good guides on where to go. Do you see that, David?
Well, I think the event of the pre-app has helped enormously in that. Occasionally, you will get an antagonistic officer that isn't looking to help. But you're right. The planning departments within certain developers and private people, they'll be on the defensive straight away. But I'm going in to get planning, but I don't think I'm going to get it. And that's the kind of reaction that they'll go in. And so you've got to go in positively and also to have a sensible conversation with the officer in front of you.
And again, the parish council element of this. Parish council's got no authority. It can't decide anything. All it can do is have the meeting, make the developer go through the hoops in front of them, and then they just pass their views on to the main authority. Well, to me, I think that local parish ought to be just merely a consultative body that is sent a form out. We've received this planning, application.
FYI.
What do you think? You've got 21 days to
Yeah.
put your case and sort of deal with it that way. Everything that we do seems so elongated, doesn't it?
Bureaucracy is our biggest problem in everything.
Yeah.
I mean that parish council bit can take 3 or 4 months.
Yeah,
sometimes.
which is crackers, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you're right. You can have a pre-application meeting with them as well now. But it doesn't mean you're going to get it in any time soon.
No.
Small scale developers that I know, and I'm by small, so like someone that might develop 3 sites a year of 15 flats each, just small, keep work for themselves and do a little bit. If they're coming up to my ripe old age now, they've kind of had enough. They've just decided, I haven't got the fight anymore, and I'll leave it alone. And if I've got something that's, a pal of mine said to me the other day, got planning on my site in so and so. It's only a small site, and I said, "Oh, well done. You're going to build it?" He went, "No, no. I'm just going. It's got an income. I'll keep the income, and then one day I'll sell it."
Yeah.
Because he just hasn't got the
appetite anymore.
The appetite is the right word. Yeah.
I think you're right. Okay, David. Well, we touched on this in part 1 of the programme, but many property investors and potential landlords have followed the practice of investing where a new rail or transport hub has been planned. Has this investment policy worked? And if so, are there any known factual examples of this? I'm thinking perhaps of the Elizabeth Line route, which has now been completed.
I think it has.
One of the few. Yeah.
It's a great line as well.
It is, yeah.
Air conditioned, clean, fresh.
Yeah.
No
Wi-Fi though.
It doesn't work, does it?
No.
That's quite good, isn't it? To not.
Well, I suppose.
To not have someone else next to you blast their Instagram next to you. I think it's worked in the main. We previously would always look at those kind of things. So a regeneration area would normally have a new rail line, bus service, call it what you like, but the Elizabeth line, it certainly put areas such as Romford and Harold Wood and places like that on the map, which previously were sort of outwaters out there. And I know we did a number of developments in Romford that performed really well at the time. A well-known developer that you and I know really well would always build backing onto a railway. Maybe that was because they found the land well and were able to build there. So these kind of things definitely help.
What do you think, Finbarr?
It makes sense. If you think about historically where we used to build along rivers, and now we build along train lines and hubs and so on. I just don't think, if you think about the irony of talking about creating these grey belts, well, actually, if we were building infrastructure, we probably wouldn't need the grey belts. We'd just actually follow the line, wouldn't we?
I have to say, I've said on the programmes before, I very much like the process that they provide quite often in the Middle East of taking an area of land. The government will put in all the infrastructure, the electric, the plumbing, the drainage, everything else, and then say, right, developers, what kind of chunk do you want of this? And I think that's a very positive way to develop, and I think that would cut down a lot of time in our process and probably make 1.5 million homes achievable. I think if we could do that.
Who's going to fund it? That's the problem.
Yeah, well, it has to be the government, doesn't it?
Which is us at the end of the day. The government is us. It's our taxpayers, aren't they?
At least we'd have something solid for our money rather than a load of useless masks and aprons that don't protect anybody from anything and all the rest of the issues that the last government was left with. But I think we need to start thinking in a rather more innovative way. And again, down to construction methods. Finbarr and I have recently done a programme where we've been talking about modular construction, and that must play a bigger part in what we're doing, mustn't it?
I would have thought so. I mean, is it something that is going to come down the line? Because every time we looked at modular over the years, you had to pay so much up front.
That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
That's the issue.
You had to pay so much up front, you couldn't get it bonded, and so therefore the banks wouldn't fund it. So in the end of the day, it worked out as cheap or the same money to go build the things. That was the problem.
I think it can work out that way. I think what's happening now is that, first of all, regulation keeps on changing. So if you're modular, if you think about who's left the modular market, people like L&G, because they couldn't get surety of supply, they couldn't build the pipeline. And then regulations change. They go, oh, hang on a minute, we've got to stop doing what we're doing and change what we were about to do. So there's that element. There's the element of whether it's modular for full units and modular for components of full units. Ultimately, you have to pay before they leave the factory. You've got to pay deposits, and they've got to leave before you actually get your hands on them. Our maths, when we analyse this, our maths says that based on skills and labour shortages or the cost to install, if you're doing things like modular bathrooms or kitchens, it should save between sort of 20 and 50% of the total cost to do the full job end to end. The problem is as you say, if you're relying on external funders to supply that cash flow, they want to know what exists in the factory. So now they're sending inspectors to the factory to check that. That's got a cost to it. And the engineers required to design those systems, well, there's not very many of those either, and they're not that prevalent in construction. They're in other sectors. So you've got all these little bottlenecks which actually all add up in this country to it not actually flowing. We were saying previously that if you were in China, well, it doesn't matter. The government is saying, how much money do you need to do it? And then to go and do it.
It does help that they print it, I suppose.
Yeah,
so
it does.
Quite useful. It's part of the answer. I mean, it must happen at the end of the day because Scandinavia's quite big on the modular stuff. So eventually it's got to come into play, I would have thought.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Anyway, there we are. That's all we've got time for today. So big thank you to Finbarr Doyle. Thank you for coming in, Finbarr. And David Galman, our development expert. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time. Hello, I'm Stephen Galpin, host on Property Question Time. Now, if you're a property professional and you have expertise which can help answer our viewers' questions, please get in touch through the website propertytv.uk. Look forward to hearing from you.